Welcome back. All right, so sitting 3 weeks away from Halloween, and I thought, what better day to discuss curses? And I chose the Colorado Rockies baseball hat because I don't want to prejudice the results here when we're talking about cursed NHL franchises, but the Rockies, they've had their problems. So looking at cursed NHL franchises, and these are not in just some randomized order. There is an order to which I wanted to talk about them. And so I've included some magnets on the board here that could qualify as kind of Halloween. Although Patrick Star wouldn't qualify as Halloween, nor the Mad Donald Duck. So right here. There we go. I have no idea what I'm doing. Being that, and I haven't had a reason to use that magnet yet. I knew at some point in time it would come in handy, and so I'm using it here. So if you're a hockey fan, you feel like your franchise is cursed and they're not on the board, there are reasons. How recently did they win the Stanley Cup? If a team's won the Stanley Cup in the last approximately 20 years, for Detroit, they're not quite that far, but it feels like it. I think everybody other than Detroit is over 20 years. And for Detroit, really it is just their recent lack of success that has had me add them to the board. But for many watching this, they'll say, hey, the Wings won a bunch of Stanley Cups late 90s, early 2000s. Can't just have them on the board, and yet they're there. So we'll start off talking about Buffalo. Yep, we'll talk about Buffalo. 54 seasons they've been in the NHL. No Stanley Cups to speak of there. One Stanley Cup final of recent history, which would be 1999. And they were dragged there by Hasek. It's been 14 seasons since the Buffalo Sabres made it to the playoffs. There are kids in middle school who have not seen the Buffalo Sabres play a playoff game. You're talking about cursed franchises. It kind of has to start with the Buffalo Sabres, who were first overall in 06-07. So they're so cool that they were cursed by the President's Trophy before the Chicago Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup, and we really started talking about the curse. So Buffalo was ahead of the curse. Most teams are ahead of the curve. Buffalo's ahead of the curse. And I really hope that this storyline changes for Buffalo as soon as possible. I don't want them on the board next time I'm talking about cursed franchises, which I normally am with Misery Index. This is not a Misery Index, though. I don't think I did a Misery Index this summer, actually. I can do an updated Misery Index. Right now, there's Sabres fans going, I think this is enough. But there may be some people who want to see a Misery Index. Detroit, as I mentioned, 17 seasons since they won the Stanley Cup. But it's been 9 seasons since they were in the playoffs. So that's why they're on the board. 9 seasons without playoffs. And even this year, there are a lot of people saying, well, if they don't make it, they're fine. It's not a big... Yeah, a decade. What's a decade? This is a bizarre time we're living in where a team can be out of the playoffs for 10 years and people go, this is okay. This is fun. This is part of the plan. It'll be 20 years and then we'll be good. And then in 30 years, we're champs. Sounds good, right? All right, cool. The last time they were first overall was 07-08. They won the Stanley Cup that year, so no curse for them. They were in the final in 09 where they lost that rematch against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's not on the board because, of course, they're not. So if you're going to say, well, Pittsburgh's missed the playoffs for a few straight years, you're not cursed. San Jose, it's been 33 seasons, still no Stanley Cup for them. 6 seasons since they last made the playoffs. It's 2016, they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final, the first Stanley Cup final that I covered on this channel. And that was seen as a big deal. The San Jose Sharks had been this team that had never got over the hump, and it felt like that might be a starting point, and it wasn't. The last time they were first overall in the league was 08-09. They didn't win the Cup that year either because they haven't won the Cup yet. San Jose is not a team that I qualify as being in the same realm as San Jose, or in the same realm as San Jose. They're not in the same realm as themselves. This is truly Halloween, a spooky time. I wouldn't put them in the same realm as Buffalo. Buffalo's kind of, I should put a crown over that, but if I do, then Kings fans are going to be like, well, what did we do? So, yeah, San Jose. Let's get to Columbus. 24 seasons, no Stanley Cup, no Stanley Cup final, no division title, never first overall. The problem for Columbus has been, other than the fact they've missed the playoffs the last 5 seasons, they've never really truly been seen as a contender. And so it does make it difficult for Columbus to build up the kind of dedicated fan base you see in other locations. So when people look at the attendance in Columbus, they're like, I don't know, Columbus may not work. I've seen that on occasion on the channel. I don't understand it because Columbus's attendance is still pretty good. The fact that it's still pretty good despite the reality that in 24 seasons, this team's never been close to a Stanley Cup, I think just tells you there's a fan base there. If this team's ever a really good team and if they're able to get to a conference final, I think that city's going to go crazy. But they've never even made it to a conference final. Philadelphia, 49 seasons without a Stanley Cup. They're getting into that cursed range too. 5 seasons without playoffs. I don't think they make it this year either. I even thought about wearing a Flyers jersey because Halloween colors, right? They last made it to the final in 2010. That was not a final they were expected to be in either. They were last first overall, 84-85. They made it to the final that year, lost against the Edmonton Oilers, as they would do again in 1987. The Philadelphia Flyers have had some very good teams, but the reality is that through the whole Lindros era, they made it to the final that one time. They did not last very long in that final. And the Philadelphia Flyers definitely, to me, qualify as cursed. If I was ranking this, I might put them second of the teams I've talked about thus far. Calgary, 35 seasons without a Stanley Cup, 3 seasons without playoffs. They last made it to the final in 2004. They were last first overall the year they won the Cup, 88-89. They was not considered to be a curse at that point in time at all. If you're first overall, you have a pretty good chance of going to the final and maybe winning it. The Calgary Flames have gone through some tough times. Them being a small Canadian market is part of the reason, I think, why they've had their struggles with staying at the top. We've seen some very big names leave the team. Johnny Gaudreau went to Columbus. Matthew Tkachuk ends up in Florida. And now there's a decision to be made on Rasmus Andersson. It's a franchise that has had its struggles with generally holding on to star players. Really, if you go back to the 90s, there have been problems on and off with that. So, yeah, the Flames I would qualify as not necessarily cursed, but not having been in a Stanley Cup final for over 20 years. It's not far off. Nashville, 26 seasons for them, no Stanley Cup. They made it to the final in 2017, and they celebrated that, well, with all the banners. But then they won the President's Trophy in 2018, the last time and the only time they've been first overall. And since then, there really hasn't been a lot to write home about with Nashville. I don't know that I'd qualify them as cursed. I don't know that I would. But then we get to this next column, and we're into the New York Islanders, and there's a case to be made here. So 41 seasons since their last Stanley Cup, which makes me feel older than I want to. The last time they were in the final was 84. So that was the 5th straight year they were in the Stanley Cup final. They lost that year to the Edmonton Oilers, just ran out of gas. They were first overall that year, 83-84. They were the number 1 team, got all the way to the final, and the Oilers took them out. I would say, yeah, if you look at the last 40 years in this franchise's history, whether you're talking about Milbury, whether you're talking about a person buying the team who didn't have any actual money and they didn't check first, whichever situation you want to talk about with the Islanders, you can definitely make an argument that the Islanders would belong ahead of Philadelphia and below Buffalo if you're talking about cursed franchises currently. But make way for Vancouver. 54 seasons for Vancouver, much like their expansion brethren in Buffalo. They may be separated by a vast swath of land, but these cities are so close together when it comes to their histories. The last Stanley Cup final for Vancouver being 2011. The last time they were first overall, 2011-2012. So for the Vancouver Canucks, it's been a lot of frustration. I know that when I did a video and I was talking about teams with endless frustration, I did see a comment of why aren't the Canucks here? Because they do get into the playoffs. They do move on in the playoffs. Usually when they get in, they're usually in at least the second round. But the reality is that not winning a Stanley Cup for this bloody long means you can qualify them as cursed. So I would say Buffalo number 1, Vancouver number 2, the 1970 expansion. I've made the monkey paw comment recently. I could throw it in again here. But somebody's been making some wishes, and they are not in favor of Vancouver and Buffalo, and they've been doing it since 1970. The New York Rangers, 30 seasons since their last Stanley Cup. So 1940, they decided after they'd paid off their mortgage for Madison Square Garden that they would burn those papers in the Stanley Cup. And that was a no-no. Also, the New York Rangers put the New York Americans out, which Red Dutton wasn't happy about. So Red Dutton was seen as part of the curse of the New York Rangers, which got broke in 1994. Or did it? because since 1994, they have not won it again. They did get to the final in 2014, did not win there. The last time they were first overall was 2024. So just a year since they were first overall, but then they followed that up by missing the playoffs. The New York Rangers, to me, I couldn't qualify them necessarily as cursed at this point in time because they do have the 94 Cup. But there's Rangers fans that are going to watch this and go, that's the only cup we've won since 1940. So is the cup still in, is the curse still in effect? Did that cup really break it? I would say the fact they've been in the final again since that's good news. That's a positive, right? And then I look over at Philly and go, right, yeah. Anyways, the New York Rangers, I don't qualify necessarily as cursed at this point in time. And then we get to Toronto. So the 4 teams that remain here made the playoffs this past season. It is difficult for me to qualify them necessarily as cursed as a result. But the Toronto Maple Leafs would certainly have a fan base that would tell me, hey, 57 seasons without a Stanley Cup feels like a curse. Not being in a Stanley Cup final since 1967. And that doesn't get brought up as much as the fact they haven't won a cup. They haven't even been in a final since the 1967 expansion. So Toronto's overdue, but I mean, when I saw that there were still people picking Toronto this year to win the Stanley Cup in 2026, my brain went, really? I hope they're right. I genuinely hope they're right. The last time that the Leafs were first overall in the league was 62-63. So the Leafs, trying to measure the Leafs against Buffalo and Vancouver, there are reasons you would go with Toronto at this point in time. Maybe, but I still think Buffalo number 1. Does Toronto bump Vancouver down to number 3? You guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Ottawa, 32 seasons in the league, no Stanley Cups. I know the original Ottawa Senators won the Stanley Cup. That is a different franchise. The franchise that came into the league in expansion in 1992, brand new franchise. Other than the city's name and the fact that they used the name Senators again, there is no connection to that original Senators franchise. They made it to the Stanley Cup final in 2007, got ran over by Anaheim when they got there. They were last first overall in 2002-03. I think that's the only time that Ottawa's been first overall. And Ottawa was seen as an excellent team back in 2003. They just were not able to get far enough in those playoffs. And so Ottawa, curse adjacent maybe with Ottawa. Definitely the Eugene Melnyk era was something. It feels like now things have got better. They've got better players. They're trending in the right direction. But I would still say yes to the curse. The Winnipeg Jets, 25 seasons, no Stanley Cups. That includes Atlanta, of course. They were first overall this year. Didn't do them any help in the playoffs. Did them no good in the playoffs. They still lost in the second round. They very nearly lost in the first round, honestly. And Connor Hellebuyck in the playoffs is not Connor Hellebuyck from the regular season. And that's something that hopefully he gets straightened out and they get straightened out as well. And then you got Minnesota, 24 seasons, no Stanley Cups. They've never been first overall. They've never got out of the conference final. And the last time they got to the conference final was 2003. So Minnesota could absolutely make that argument that they are as cursed as anybody else. Now, not cursed, but definitely teams to keep an eye on. Seattle, no Stanley Cups for them, of course, going into year 5. And Utah. Utah's on the board because they've never won a Stanley Cup. I felt like I wanted to have every team that's never won a Stanley Cup, but that also extends back to their time in Arizona. They're hoping that every bit of Arizona curse, and definitely if they were still in Arizona, they'd be on this board. Absolutely would. But I'm giving them the benefit of just wiping out that history and saying, okay, on their own, because they do qualify as a new franchise to the NHL as well. But just the one season so far for Utah. Looking to avoid the kind of curse which followed the Arizona/Phoenix Coyotes throughout their time in Phoenix/Arizona. So if I had to rank them, I still think Buffalo goes number 1. I honestly think Vancouver and Toronto could fight over second, and whoever doesn't get that gets third. You could give... I feel like the Islanders and Rangers could fight over the next spot, or the Flyers. There are definitely some teams you could look at in this NHL and say they're cursed. And they're not all Canadian teams either. For all of the discussion about Canadian teams not winning Stanley Cups, and accurate, But there are plenty of American teams, too, that are waiting for their turn with Lord Stanley, who either have never had that turn or haven't had that turn in a very long time. But let me know your thoughts. Which teams do you think are really cursed in the National Hockey League? 3 weeks away from Halloween, why not, right? And which ones do you think are going to break that? Which of the teams on this board do you think we're going to be talking about as Stanley Cup champions the soonest? There's a way to look at it. If I had to hazard a guess, it's hard to pick the teams that have made the playoffs in a while. Rangers. Maybe the Rangers are the next one to get a Stanley Cup of these teams on this board. If I had to pick one. I want it to be the Jets, honestly, or Toronto. That would be great. Oh, you want me to talk Vancouver? Seriously? You guys, you think? I still say Vancouver doesn't win a Stanley Cup in my lifetime. If they want to prove me wrong, I'd be very grateful. I'd be very happy about it. I don't think so. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. It's greatly appreciated. I will talk to you again soon.